If you are leading change, building a team, or implementing new procedures, Gonzaga University's online Masters in Organizational Leadership gives you the tools for success. With concentrations in change, global, and servant leadership, you'll get the most relevant training and education to help you tackle any challenge. Visit gonzaga.edu/leader and find out how Gonzaga's organizational leadership degree can affect positive change in your life and career. That's gonzaga.edu/leader.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo, and I am with my awesome friend Jeffrey. Hey man, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Elmo. Thanks for having me on the podcast. And I'll say a little bit about myself. I'm a philosophy professor at Saginaw Valley State University in Michigan in the United States. I've been teaching for about 25 years now. I got a PhD in philosophy from Ohio State, again, about 25 years ago. It's in philosophy. My area of specialization is the philosophy of science. So, years ago when I first started this, all my publications were on something called chaos theory, which you don't hear much about now, but in the 90s it was a big deal. And so from there, I've specialized and written about topics in the philosophy of physics. So all that interesting stuff, the weird stuff you hear about quantum mechanics and relativity, all that. That's the stuff that I talk about full time. Before I started a PhD program in philosophy, I had been an engineer. My bachelor's degree is in electrical engineering, and so I made the big switch to philosophy in graduate school, which is something I don't necessarily recommend to people.
Awesome. Okay. Well, in that case, though, you're in terms of philosophy and science. I know that science used to be a branch of philosophy, but nowadays they're so it appears in mainstream, I guess media that philosophy and science are sort of mutually exclusive in a way that philosophy is just a bunch of mumbo jumbo in your imagination, and science are actually things that you can prove, but I completely disagree, of course. But okay, you're someone that came from a STEM field, right? And you focus on empirical research, verification, falsifiability, demonstration in terms of just experiments and research. But why did you switch to philosophy, bro?
Oh, well, I think it's kind of a family answer, I guess. I didn't when I went into engineering as an undergraduate, I didn't exactly know what I was getting into. I didn't have any engineers in my family and the like, but I was raised by a single mom, and I was good in math and good in physics, and so every adult I knew, when I was in high school, told me, you got to be an engineer, you got to get out there and make money and all that. And it wasn't really until very far into that engineering program that I realized that really, not sure that was my choice. I could have been happy, I think, doing that, but I wanted to see what else was out there, what I wanted to possibly do other with my life. And so that's when I started looking around. I wasn't sure. I didn't know that in kind of looking to the the broader horizon that I'd end up as a philosophy professor. That certainly wasn't the plan, but I did want to explore, a little bit more broadly than this kind of path that I kind of felt that I got locked into a little bit.
Okay. Can you give me a brief background? Just give in a nutshell, what was your, I guess, in terms of your journey in terms of religion, what kind of household were you raised in? And then what sort of religions did you dive into, and where are you now?
So I was raised nominally Catholic. So, we never went to church, but, if I asked, I'd ask my mom, so, what are we? And she'd tell me we're Catholic. Kind of like I'd ask about politics. Are we Republicans or Democrats? When I first knew that, that was a thing. And she told me, well, we're Democrats. And okay, fine. I know what sign to line up under. As I went further along, by the time I was in high school, I'd actually given all that up. I was an atheist and a happy atheist. Things were going well, and I didn't have any of these deep needs in my life that some theists we'll talk about. In fact, the people that I saw who were engaged in churches and in Christian groups, it seemed pretty clear to me that it was just an emotional thing. It was just a psychological thing, and that wasn't appealing at all. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more I thought that maybe someday I could like write a book. I could show that the whole Christian thing, the whole belief in God, it's all just emotion. It's all just psychology. And so to do that, I realized I probably have to know more about the subject matter than I did. Never having gone to church or anything, I didn't know any of that stuff. So I started going and hanging out in one Christian group that met in my high school, and just came to realize that there's just a lot more to it than I had believed at first. There was actually my sister had put me in touch with a pastor friend of hers who could give me some literature, and I realized that I wasn't the first person who had these sort of questions, had these sort of objections to theism. That there's actually quite this a long background, literally hundreds of years of scholars who had asked all these tough questions. And so once I started digging in and realizing, wow, much to my surprise, there were really good answers to all my objections. That's when I realized I had kind of a problem. So all of a sudden things weren't as neat and clean as I had thought. And so, within a couple of years, I remember just driving down the road and just coming to realize that it wasn't a decision so much. It just, I just found myself, believing, actually, I think this is true. I think there actually is a God. I believe, the story that the kind of the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. It's like I really think that probably is the best explanation for what we know, all told. Which again, in some ways, is kind of disappointing, because I realized that that meant something for my life. If there is a God, then that kind of means something, right? That's you're gonna have to adjust to this, to this powerful agent, that's out there and has plans for you and your life. And so so then I started attending a church, and have ever since then been a Christian theist. And so that then my understanding of what that means, and even what the problems are, and the answers to those problems, that's gotten better, deeper over the years. Certainly studying philosophy, you get into some deeper issues. But yeah, I'm quite comfortable here, years later, in saying, yes, I'm a Christian theist. And I think that overall, as a worldview, gives you the best explanation for everything we know, everything we've experienced. Yeah, all in. That's the best worldview.
Wow, this is really interesting. I guess, you came into study religion and the philosophy of basically what it means to be a Christian, why they believe it, and you thought that you were going to come back and bring home the bacon and say, oh, I proved it all wrong. But right. Instead, I guess you sort of won in a way, which is also good, right? You won in the Christian way, I guess. Yeah. And okay, I want to ask this then, right? because you're someone who was, in your mindset that, religion is just, a bunch of emotional chemicals in the brain, and this is why people sort of believe. But how do you know then that right now you're not someone who is in that hypothesis of yours that, just religious people are just emotionally inclined to believe? Like, how do you know you escape that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess it's always a possibility. All I can say is that's not how I came in, and I don't, even now today. It's not. I don't consider it to be any sort of emotional crutch or anything like that. It really is primarily for rational reasons. Ultimately, it's the arguments and the evidence. And if at the end of the day, you could show me something better. If you had an overall system, you could show me that it was not, then I think, I'd be attracted to that overall system. It really is. And I think at least most philosophers hope to think of themselves in this light. It really is a matter of truth. I'm really trying to get at the right answer as best we can. So it was never an emotional thing, and I still don't think it is. It's not primarily.
So basically, just to simplify your answer, if someone objects that, hey, bro, you became a Christian because of your emotional tendencies, you say, no, bro. I actually leave emotion out the door and actually look at the rationality of what it means to be a Christian, and I'm just convinced by it. It's to me, it's just the truth, and I can't deny it. Is that what?
Yeah.
Wow.
Ultimately, that's I mean, I could be. It's always possible I'm mistaken, and there's some hidden emotion, and I just don't understand my own mind. But in terms of my own reflections, what got me in at the beginning, and what keeps me in now, it's ultimately it's the best explanation for everything we know, historically and scientifically and philosophically, all told. It's a matter of reason, not a matter of emotion.
Okay. Let me ask you this then, right? Like, if you're someone who dives into philosophy and probably looks into all the theories, right? And especially in terms of ontology, and I'm talking about either materialism or idealism or dualism. And I want to ask you, what kind of ontology do you hold into? And if you're a theist, let me predict that you're probably looking at, consciousness as this metaphysically emergent thing, and it's actually the fundamental basis of all reality, and that's why you're a theist. Or I guess lay the groundwork for your theism. Would that be the case?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, as ontology, of course, I believe in the material world. I believe in the stuff that a materialist or physicalist believes in. But then there's at least one other being, immaterial being other than that. There's going to be God. If you're asking about things like free will and a soul or mind, I certainly lean towards the dualist side. Again, all told, in terms of trying to explain why it is that we have free will and moral accountability. And also, as a Christian, I take information that is in the Bible. I take that seriously. That is information that's given to us, from a knowledgeable source. And so, insofar as the Bible and the notion of the afterlife, it seems that it's not knocked down. I mean, it's not absolutely the case, and I'm not completely convinced of this, but it seems that all told, that some sort of dualism. That meaning there's more to us as human beings than just our bodies and brains. I think there is an immaterial aspect, to human beings, probably.
Okay, let's try a sort of a thought experiment, right? Let's say that your mind is a vacuum right now, and you don't believe anything. You're just an exploring mind. Observing everything, the data, and observing that you have sort of some rationality within you, and you could know some things, right? So if you're this, let's say, teenager, right? And how would you arrive at the conclusion that there is a God? Where would you start?
Where would I start today? So this wasn't available. The interesting thing is the argument I think that gets you in the door wasn't available when I was a teenager. But it would be something. There's something that physicists have discovered within the last 30 or 40 years is this notion of fine tuning, in the universe. That there are fundamental constants, in physics, like the gravitational constant and a number of others, maybe 20 others, that if they weren't the exact value that they are, if they weren't in a very narrow range, if you think of like the strength of gravity, that if it had been in the universe a little bit stronger, a little bit weaker, ever so slightly, then life itself would be impossible anywhere in the universe. And so gravity is an example, and the other three fundamental forces in the universe all have this kind of fine-tuning aspect to them, and it's kind of a puzzle. Most physicists think this is something that's actually pretty surprising. The universe, shouldn't be set up in just such a way to permit life, but it is. And so, why is that the case? And so I got a chapter in my first book where I kind of go through the different possible answers, and I still think ultimately it's the design answer. I think that the world looks fine-tuned for not the world, the universe looks fine-tuned for the existence of life, because it literally has been fine-tuned. It has been designed this way, so that life and including rational life like we have, that would be possible and sustainable. Again, that's a good way in, I think, as a type of design argument or teleological argument. It doesn't rely on the Bible or anything like that, but at least it gets you moving, I think, in the right direction.
So, okay, after the fine tuning, right, it doesn't really lead you to a specific like classical theist God, right? You could be in a simulation or whatever. So how do you then, keep it going and actually reach the conclusion that this classical God, omnis God is real? Yeah.
So there are other arguments, non biblical arguments. I mean, they don't require any scripture or anything, that are pretty well known. I don't know what like my second most favored argument might be. If you think there are things like ethical truths, moral truths, that are really out, that aren't just things that we invent, but are discovered. Like it really is. There's really something wrong with torturing children. It's not just that we feel bad about such things. If there are moral truths, if moral realism is right, that does seem to be at least odd in a world that's fully material, right? Trying to figure out how ethical truths, where they could live, where there's room in a universe that's ultimately just matter and energy, how there could be not just truths of physics, but truths of ethics. So again, that argument, the moral argument, it is useful for people who think there are ethical truths. A lot of people don't, and so this won't be helpful to them. But I think if you really think these are truths to be discovered, then I think that is going to lead you to more like an agent, like God. It certainly isn't going to be just an immaterial, irrational presence, out there.
So when it comes to this, then does it mean that you're looking at a fine tuning argument and then a moral argument for God? So does that then sort of equal? It's really rational for me to believe that there is a classical theist God? Do you think that is there more to it?
When you say classical theist, I mean there is a lot of theology that is brought in. So it's going to be that these are arguments that are going to get you to, I think, something supernatural at least, right? Something beyond, maybe at least, yeah. And then once you get to at least a creator God, yes, a deist God, then now you've established some rational basis for believing there is some sort of being like that. Now the question is, okay, which of the options, theist, deist, what have you, which of those is the best option? And so, for that, then I might go completely on the other end and now start talking about things like, again, as a Christian, I think the arguments for the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth are actually, quite good as well. So that gets you, very specific then, right? Not just something supernatural, but that.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
really
But before we move into that, though, I want to ask you, like, if someone were, you said you're most of your, I guess your belief system is grounded on rationality, right? So if you say that it's rational for you to believe in God, right, and or at least a deist God, and by using the fine-tuning and moral argument, then if someone were to prove to you that the current argument you have for fine-tuning and moral argument are flawed or incoherent, would you then say that, okay, then currently I don't believe in God, but until I find an actual complete argument that actually leads to a deist God?
Well, see, I don't think you can like just siphon off the thing about the resurrection, though, because for me it's a package deal. Because if the resurrection actually happened, if you actually had this man who predicted that he was going to die and then come back to life, that does again seem like there's something supernatural going on there, and so you've got lots of data, arguments from fine tuning, arguments from the moral argument. Explaining the resurrection of Jesus, explaining other supernatural phenomena, that people seem to have experienced, and then overall coming up with the best explanation overall for all those things. That's what's going to get you to something like the theistic God. So if the fine-tuning argument, if that by itself, ultimately is flawed, or becomes some really great naturalistic explanation for fine-tuning, then I don't think it all comes crashing down, because at this stage there's a lot of there are a lot of arguments overall, and a lot of data overall, and so it's a bit like, some people think of it as like it's like a rope, right? You've got lots of little strands in there that all come together to make this thing that can bear a lot of weight. So if you snap one of those strands, I'm not, that's too bad. I hope the fine-tuning argument doesn't go away, but it's not fatal, I think, to my belief system.
Mm-hmm. So let's say, then granted then that this deist God is proven to be one of the biggest possibilities for why we exist, right? Then then as a part of package deal is that Jesus Christ what died on the cross and was resurrected after 3 days, and this is historically proven, therefore the Christian God is real.
It gives evidence to it. I mean, if you have a person who is working within a particular worldview, right, and made such a prediction, and then it comes true, that gives some weight to their views. So I think Jesus is someone you want to pay attention to, and his disciples are people that you want to understand what it is that they believe, because they're in touch with something that most people are not in touch with.
Okay, let's talk about Jesus then, and in terms of why you think it is actually historically reliable to say that Jesus actually existed, died, and was resurrected, right? Because what evidence do you have, and how can you say that the text actually correspond to actual reality and was not corrupted or manipulated or just disillusioned writers?
Sure. So there's a couple of questions in there, but one, let's just talk about the text. So one of my objections, even as a teenager, was the worry that all the supernatural, so maybe there was this teacher, this rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth, but all the supernatural stuff in the Bible, I thought, well, that can be explained by people later, down through the Middle Ages or something like that. They just put those stories in there. It's like a legend that accrues over time. And there's two reasons to know that just isn't the case. For one, we've got I also believed, and a lot of people believe, that in terms of the Bible, they believe this notion of the telephone game. You know that telephone game? The idea that someone makes up a story, and then they tell one other person, and that person tells another person, and you can do this in a room full of kids, and at the end you listen to the version that got passed down to that 20th kid, and they recite it, and it's nothing at all, like what the first person said. And so that's kind of what I thought about the Bible. It get translated and retranslated and down through the ages, and so what we have now, it's just there's nothing in there that you can rely on. It just turns out it's not true. When you look to biblical scholars and just flat out historians, they'll show you all these hundreds of manuscripts that we have. Back not just translation, but in the original Greek, in the language in which the text was written originally. So this whole telephone game sort of analogy for the Bible is just completely wrong. And instead, it's more like it's a little bit more like a form letter or something. So I send you a letter, and then you make 10 copies of it and send it to your friends, and then they make 10 copies, and then they make 10 copies. So what we have are we have some samples of those copies that were made, all the way back, at least in some cases, some parts of the Bible back to the 2nd or 3rd century. So, we know it isn't something that things like the resurrection, it really looks like that story was part of the original message. It wasn't something that just cropped up in the Middle Ages. So that's one thing in terms of the text, why it is it that we can trust the text. They really haven't been corrupted and changed, dramatically down through the ages. The other, just then as far as the resurrection itself, the approach I would take, there's more than one way to do this, but I think maybe the easiest one is to say, well, what instead of me trying to convince you, say that the Bible is true and you should believe these stories, how about if you ask a critical historian, a non-Christian historian, what will you give me as far as what happened in the first century, what sort of things in the Bible, what is true, and they'll give you a handful of things, right? It is the case that because Jesus is mentioned in some non-Christian sources, that sure there was this Jesus of Nazareth. That he caused this disturbance in Jerusalem, was ultimately crucified because the Romans did that sort of thing. We have good evidence for Roman crucifixion. So the idea is disciples were distraught at his death, that they thought that he was going to be the new king of Israel, and then he dies initially. The empty tomb, if there was an empty tomb, it's a little bit more controversial, but a lot of critics will grant you that that at one point that the disciples did discover this empty tomb. Doesn't mean, again, that by itself doesn't mean that Jesus was resurrected, but they went to the tomb where they remembered Jesus having been buried, and he wasn't there after 3 days. So there's about 12 things all told, including the testimony of the person we think now of as the Apostle Paul, who tells his own story, that he was not a follower of Jesus. He was actually on the other side. He was a persecutor of Jesus, but had an experience, at least again, from his perspective, he thinks he encountered the risen Christ on the road to Damascus, and then that experience then put him on the other side. He started to become a Christian. So, if you just take these facts that even critical historians will allow, none of which is supernatural by itself, because they'll grant that Paul had some sort of experience, but maybe it was a hallucination or something like that. When you take all the things that the critical historians will allow, and you say, okay, well, if it wasn't a resurrection, then what was it? I mean, how do we explain these things? And I would say that each of the alternative explanations fails to account for some bit of evidence that even the critical scholars will allow is the case. So something like, just give you an example. So something like, well, maybe the reason there was an empty tomb is that the disciples came and stole the body after the fact, and then reported that the tomb was empty. Well, the problem with that is that if that was the case, I mean, most historians will agree that the disciples seem to have thought that Jesus rose from the dead, right? They could have been lying. I guess is a possibility. They stole the body and lied. The problem is that all but one of the original apostles was killed, was murdered, in some case tortured to death, and we don't have any record from Jewish historians or Roman sources that like any of them recanted. None of them changed their story at the end. And so, as one friend of mine, likes to say, liars don't make good martyrs. So if you told a lie, and then you were possibly going to die for that lie, then you would probably, probably you're going to give that up. Probably you're going to confess, no, I lied, and and so everything's fine. But none of those early guys, none of those early apostles, seem to have changed their story. So the idea that the apostles stole the body and then lied about it later, it just doesn't fit the historical facts. So in terms of now you have to go down the list, to give you the full argument. You'd have to go down, okay, what all the different things that could have happened, and then see if they meet the if they fit the data that even non-Christian scholars will give.
Okay, yeah, I guess then that understanding the whole package of that's where you say that a man like Christianity is just true.
Ultimately, yeah, it's what philosophers call an inference to the best explanation, right? You've got certain data, you got to try to explain that data. And overall, I think that the best explanation for what we know historically is that, actually the resurrection happened. Either you're going to have to say the resurrection happened, or we just don't know, right? It's just something happened. We have no idea. But if you're gonna have some sort of explanation that covers all the data, it looks like the supernatural one is the only one that.
Okay, and then I wanna take a look into what you've covered in your book, right? About divine actions, right? Is that what it's called? What is it about, man?
Well, let's see. The second one is called Divine Action, Determinism, and the Laws of Nature. So divine action is just the fancy term for how God acts, what God is doing. So we know, God creates, and God upholds, sustains everything. And then whatever else God might do, including things like miracles, the broad academic term for that is divine action, what God is doing.
And what was the first book about?
Physics of Theism, the physics of theism, God, physics, and the philosophy of science. And there I took you through the different ways that theologians and philosophers of religion want to use science, mainly physics, almost exclusively physics, and how they want to interact with things like quantum mechanics and chaos theory and general relativity, and some work they want to do with that. And sometimes the things they say I think are good and right, and some things that they say aren't so good and don't get the science correct. And so it just takes you through, a handful of those different things we find in science that philosophers of religion and theologians want to use, and try to then work your way through all that to try to give a kind of a more informed understanding of what it is they're trying to do.
Well, I guess that I want to read that book too, but maybe you could give us I guess like a breakdown of how theists actually use science specifically, like how can a theist use physics to sort of indicate that God is real? I'm really interested.
Yeah. So the one is that fine tuning thing that I talked. So one whole chapter of that first book is on this notion of fine tuning and explaining that a little bit more. Again, there are lots of web pages and books out there that kind of give you the examples of fine tuning. I do give some, a handful, I think the best examples, but then go through the possible explanations. Okay, so if you don't like the idea that you don't like the design idea that God literally put these in place, then what else can you give? What are all the alternative explanations, and then kind of critique those, go down the line. So it's the same. Really, it's the same. The logic of it isn't all that different from what I said about the resurrection. You've got data, and then you've got alternative explanations, and then you're trying to weed out what is the best explanation among those alternatives. So when it comes to fine tuning, at least as of today, I think that the best explanation. The best explanation for the data is that, yeah, look, the universe looks fine-tuned because it really has been set up that way. The other arguments in there aren't, the other topics in the book aren't so much arguments for the existence of God. Again, it's just ways that theists want to use physics in some way. So I'll give you an example. Here's something that like ties the two books together. Some people, there's a friend of mine, Bob Russell, is a physicist theologian. He's got PhDs in both physics and theology. So he thinks that God like works. He's concerned, like a number of theologians are, about the laws of nature. There are a lot of folks out there that think that God doesn't often, maybe never, violates the laws of nature. So like God has instituted the laws, and then he decides to work within those things that he has ordained. And so Bob thinks that God then works through quantum mechanics, that you have these random events down at the ground floor of quantum mechanics, and because they really are random, ontologically random, there really is no cause ultimately that makes say a given atom of uranium decay at a particular time, that events like that, God could work within those events, make them come out the way he wants without violating any laws of nature, because they really are ultimately random. So again, there's quantum mechanics. There's a way that theologians want to try to bring in quantum mechanics to talk about stuff that God does. And so that was a topic in one chapter in my first book, and then I realized I had a whole lot more to say about it, and so I wrote a whole second book really just on that topic.
Yeah, and okay, well, in terms of miracles, right, and okay, I guess I get a lot of objections in terms of the Bible, because we know for a fact in our scientific observation of how the universe works that miracles don't just happen. The universe has this specific structure, and it follows it to dogmatically, I guess, and how then can we rely on a book that seems like from a modern day perspective magical, and all these miracles and legends? How do you look at the miracles in the Bible and maybe actually, I guess, sort of prove that they can actually happen?
Yeah, I just don't see the conflict. I mean, like when you put it, the way you explained it, I think is the common view that somehow science has disproven, like these can't happen. But if you look at like even the very notion of the laws of nature, where did that come from? Well, it starts in what we call the early modern period. It's people like Isaac Newton and Rene Descartes and others. They're the ones who first start talking about this notion that nature is governed by laws. But for them, this wasn't a secular idea. This wasn't a materialistic idea. They believed in laws of nature because there was a divine lawgiver. They were all theists. All the big names that you can think of from the scientific revolution, they were all theists, and they're talking about laws of nature because, yeah, ultimately they believe in God. They think this is where it comes from, and so the idea then that that you have a law-governed world, but then that somehow proves, even if the world is law governed, that proves that then God can't also act. They would have thought that doesn't make any sense at all. Why is it that God can't act in a world, in the very same world where he has set up the laws of nature? Now I realize today, like when people hear that word laws, most people don't realize that it starts with theism, right? That the actual origin of the very notion that there are laws in nature that came from theists, not from naturalists. But as a matter of history, yeah, that's absolutely locked down. There's really no controversy about that at all. In fact, I've got a chapter on the history in that second book, Divine Action, Determinism, and the Laws of Nature, which, by the way, is open source, meaning that's free. You can download the PDF right from the Routledge site if you search for that. So anyway, the history that's just not controversial at all. The laws of nature, the idea comes from theism. So yeah, I don't think that there is some sort of intrinsic tension between the notion of miracles and science. I'm not even sure that in my own view, I'm not even sure that a lot of miracles, what we think of as miracles, necessarily have to be breaking the laws of nature. I don't think the laws of nature determine like we make changes all the time. This is kind of my end story in that second book. We make changes all the time, in our world, and the laws adapt to those changes. So, I can pick up my coffee mug and I can set it back down. Well, it does. No, that's right. No, it does. It does. There is a belief there that I have the free will to do that. But if you believe that you have free will, then we make changes all the time in the world, and the laws adapt to those changes. So I think the laws don't determine each and every event. They are perfectly capable of adapting to change. If we have free will, yeah. So if we don't have free will and we're just part of the matrix of if it's ultimately it's just atoms bouncing around, yeah, then yeah, the laws of nature are going to determine everything. But yeah, I think we do. I think we do have free will, and so I think we make these sorts of changes all the time, and there's no problem with the laws of nature. We don't break the laws of nature, and so if we don't break the laws of nature, if we can make changes in the physical world without violating the laws of nature, I don't see why God can't do the same thing. And any change we can make, God can make the same change, and it doesn't violate the laws. The laws adapt to those changes.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about this free will, the free will topic. But before we dive into that, I just want to take into consideration that you're someone who's dived into the philosophy of science, right? And it's, I guess it would be, you would call it sort of your specialty, I guess. Would that be correct? Yes. Okay, yep. Then okay, I want to ask you this then, like as someone who's very familiar with the philosophy of science, and I would actually be confident to say that a lot of this people who dive into the STEM field aren't actually familiar with the term philosophy of science. They
I think that's right.
And can you, I guess, introduce that to the audience? What does it philosophy of science mean? And
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're trying to make sense of what scientists do, and how when you have advances in science, and how, say, one theory gives rise to another one. Like how does that work? How does a given scientific hypothesis, for example, exactly what's the logic of confirmation? And you might think that's pretty simple. You just do these experiments and stuff, and it turns out it's actually kind of complicated. There are questions about what is science ultimately? What is its goal? What is its aim? Is science aim to give us a literally true picture of reality, including fundamental reality, or is science merely about making good predictions? Is it about just giving us good equations and models that allow us to make better predictions and new pharmaceuticals and stuff like that? What is science about? So there's all these big questions about the nature of science. The nature of confirmation, scientific explanation. What do you do about entities that we can't see? So something I point out to a lot of my audiences, most of them, before you study the philosophy of science at all, you're probably going to be what we call, what philosophers call a scientific realist. You do think that science is about getting at how things really are. And so the way I illustrate that is like electrons. I ask in an audience, how many out there do you believe in electrons? Are there any electron skeptics out there? People who just never got the whole electron thing. And of course, people laugh and they say, "Well, of course I believe in electrons." Well, then the next question is, do you have any? All right, can you show me some? Where, if not, where are they? Who's got the electrons? And the answer is nobody's. I mean, they're unobservable entities. They're intrinsically unobservable entities. And so then, why do we believe in them? Well, the logic of belief here, the ontological belief, it comes down to the same thing that I said about theism, that, well, you've got this data, right? We've got these things we do know. And now the question is, how do we explain the things that we can see and that we do know and can confirm? And it looks like the best explanation for all that is that there are these subatomic particles, even though you can't see them. Believing in electrons, it allows you to explain an awful lot of stuff. The periodic table and electromagnetism and all this stuff. Even though, you can't see them, and you'll never be able to.
Yeah,
see
but
them.
I guess as a quick question though, there's a difference between how we've arrived at electrons and how we've arrived that there is a God, right? Because we sort of have experiments and actual demonstrable research to show that our model of the atom and that it has this electron. We have tests and we can verify that there is something in terms of a theoretical electron that provides again and again, I guess predictable results. That's why we can fairly believe that our hypothesis then becomes sort of a reliable theory, right? But when it comes to God, this is sort of is it an induction or abduction?
Abduction. I think it's abduction. In both cases, the abduction, that's the fancy term for inference to the best explanation. But see, here's why I want to disagree. I do think our belief in electrons, our belief in all of our fundamental theories, and at least as a theist, my belief in God, it's all abduction. It's all based on what evidence we have, what we can see. In the case of God, it includes things historical evidence and the like, and then trying to come up with the overall best explanation for why that is. So I think ultimately, again, you can't directly empirically detect, like I said, an electron. I think they exist, right? I do believe it, but I think it's because they fit in with as part of our overall best scientific theories, and those theories are the best explanations we have for what we do see, that experimental evidence. So no, I do want to say at the broadest level, if you zoom all the way back, what ultimately is the logic of belief in science and belief in theism, it's inference to the best explanation. It is abduction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I guess that for example, I've talked to a lot of people who also very, I guess they what do you call this? They ground their belief system on very scientific standards, right? They
Right.
just say that I'm gonna believe everything that science proves and demonstrable, but anything like a metaphysical God that is probably just in my imagination, I'm not gonna say that is true. I might consider it as a possibility, but I won't necessarily believe it just because there are some good arguments for it, because there might be a magical unicorn or something. They use that argument all the time. But would you say that their sort of standard for their belief system is consistent with the philosophy of science, or is your sort of approach to it that we have to find the best model that we inferential one that we can attain? Like which one is, I guess, more consistent with philosophy of science?
Philosophy of science, philosophy of science isn't like high school chemistry where they're just giving you the right answers, right? So everything. So there are going to be people who would disagree with my characterization that in terms of abduction and inference to the best explanation, they would say that isn't the best approach. So all these things are going to be somewhat controversial. I would say about your person that you described, though. See, I don't think I think your description is accurate. That's what they're going to say, but it actually doesn't characterize their own beliefs. So they're going to believe in things like, I mean, do they believe in electrons, right? And then once again, or quarks, that you can't have direct empirical evidence. They're believing the best, overall story at a given point in time, and they're going to be drawing on what a lot of people don't realize is science can't proceed without a number of philosophical presuppositions. Not, I don't want to call them presuppositions, but matters of philosophy that you kind of need in order to do science. So things like those same skeptics you're talking about, do they believe in laws of nature? Do they believe there are laws of nature? That in itself, that there are laws that they're in some sense governing the universe. That's not part of any given theory. There's nothing that says that there have to be laws. There's nothing that says the laws have to be uniform, meaning that the laws are the same here locally as they are, say, on the far side of Andromeda, or that the laws will be the same, in a century as they are today. Now, that person you described, that scientific skeptic, they believe those things, but the question would be on what basis? What scientific discovery tells us that the laws of nature are going to be the same in 100 years? So they're doing philosophy to some degree, and in some ways they're doing it well, and in other ways I think they're doing it not so well. I think they're actually a lot of so-called scientific skeptics who are skeptical of theism. I think what they're calling science is actually an awful lot of philosophy. It's an awful lot of naturalistic philosophy that's being smuggled in and then being labeled science because the science has the prestige. But really, no, they're really making a number of controversial philosophical assumptions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, then in terms of your critique of them, I think it's sort of the problem with their approach to their belief system is that they're not consistent with their standards, right? Because you say that if they believe in an electron because of these are this deductive reasoning, or maybe an inference of the data, then why not be consistent and apply it to God and other metaphysical I guess topics and issues. Is that the case?
If they say that the only things, I think this was part of your description, that I only believe in the things that that can be scientifically proven. Well, there's a lot of things that aren't scientifically proven. If by proof you mean I can prove that I got a coffee cup in front of me because I can see it and I put my hands on it. Well, again, there's a lot of stuff, especially in physics, which is not like that. It's not a matter of proof. It's a matter of evidence, and then explaining that evidence as best we can. And that's something less than proof. So if the hardcore skeptic says, no, I only believe in things that are scientifically proven, there's an awful lot of stuff that they should not believe. They should not believe there are laws of nature. They should not believe that the laws are going to be uniform in the future, because that's not something you can prove, and on and on and on. There's if they want to hold those things, then they're doing something more than pure empirical science. So that's all. I just want to point out that you really can't do science without a number of philosophical, presuppositions. And so once you have that in the door, right, and you realize those things aren't things that we can directly, prove or test, then now we're all kind of on the same plane. Yeah, we're all doing the best we can with what we have, and so we all have to kind of look at the data, look at the things that need to be explained, and come up with the best explanation that we can. That's what everybody's doing.
Okay, let's say that they do agree that, okay, yeah, when I make scientific claims, I'm probably also dipping my waters into naturalistic philosophy and presupposing materialism and all of that. But let's say that okay, but let's juxtapose your a metaphysical framework with mine. I can actually demonstrate that the materialism is basically what the naturalist reality that I believe in is actually here. I could empirically say that in terms of the most basic fundamental way I can know things, I can actually verify these. But you cannot. But your claim actually includes a God like transcended from reality, and it's something that you cannot verify with science. So in terms of in comparison, mine is simpler while yours carries a lot more metaphysical baggage. I would say that has to be proven still.
Yeah, it's simpler. The naturalist has the simpler ontology, and simplicity is a value. It's an explanatory value. The question is does your simpler explanation explain everything that needs to be explained? So what I would say is, all matters of events that have some sort of supernatural tinge to them, whether it's biblical miracles or things that happen today, can the naturalist explain those? I talk about with my students. Have you ever experienced just any weird events, supernatural events, ghosts or something like that? None of that stuff proves God, but in every class, people have these firsthand stories, these firsthand experiences of something that really doesn't fit very well. Whether it's something that seems like a ghost, seems like it's supernatural in some way, just doesn't fit very well into a naturalistic scheme. Now, a lot of those stories and things you see on YouTube and the like, I think they're that you can explain in terms of hallucination or fraud or something like that, but I don't think it explains them all. When you find people that aren't trying to sell books and aren't trying to just draw you to their YouTube site, and they've got they've had experiences that seem in some sense supernatural. Some of them have to do with God, some don't. I don't think that fits in very well with a naturalistic view. So yes, they have the simpler ontology, but I don't think they can explain everything that needs to be explained. And so when that happens, when you have things that your simple views don't explain, then you got to expand those views. And so yeah, I think the naturalist just doesn't explain everything, all the data that we have, all the observations and experiences that we have. I don't think the naturalist gives you a good explanation for all of those.
Okay, awesome. Okay, then I want to go back to the topic of free will, right? Are you
Sure.
a compatibilist or incompatibilist?
I'm working on that right now, and I think if you had asked me a year ago, I'd say incompatibilist. I'm a libertarian. Okay, so I'm not a determinist. Determinist, says that there is no free will. The compatibilist, the reason it's called that is because they think there's a way of making free will compatible with determinism, and the libertarian, doesn't like either one of those. The libertarian is the fully caffeinated, free will camp, and they think no, you really can't make that compatible with determinism. That's kind of the standard breakdown. But what I've come to realize, really, with the two books that I've written, especially the second one, once you get into more of the details about the laws of nature and how they work, and determinism and how it works within the scheme of the laws of nature, I think I'm in a fourth camp when I'm realizing that those three camps, there might be other options out there, or if that's not the way to put it, types of libertarianism that still could allow there to be determinism at the lower boundary. So usually the normal libertarian says, yeah, that it can't be determinism down at the bottom ground floor of, say, of physics. But I'm not so sure about that. I think maybe there is a way. You have to understand that you mentioned emergence, I think, early in the podcast. And so, yeah, I think if you have a particular view of emergence, then yeah, you can have libertarian free will. You can have indeterminism at a higher level, even if there's determinism at a lower level. But again, you asked me a question about something I'm thinking about a lot right now. That's not fully formed. So if that didn't make sense, or it doesn't seem very intuitive, that's okay. Because I haven't written any of this stuff down. It's stuff I'm just thinking about.
Okay, then in that case, I would like to ask you, I guess, this last topic for the podcast, which is in terms of axiology, just a general understanding of how you look at ethics, morality, the meaning of life, or those in general. Okay, because you are a Christian, right, and this is your initial premise. Then, how would you, conclude, or what would you conclude from that in terms of how you should behave in this world?
As an ethical system, I do teach some ethics, so some sort of Kantianism I think is probably a pretty good approach. So the Kantian, one of the things this goes back to the philosopher Immanuel Kant. So the big thing about the Kantian is not exploiting others, that you don't never use other people merely as a means to an end, as a means to get at something that you would want. And so I think the kind of things that Kantianism forbids, I think, are a really good starting place for ethics. Natural rights theory that has to do with the right to life, the security of one's person, and the like. That those are also going to be important ethical concepts. But something that's happened in philosophy in the late 20th century, kind of a big comeback, is this notion of virtue and virtue ethics. I think just knowing the right answers to ethical questions is not enough, because you might know the right answer, but not have the sort of character that allows you to live out that sort of answer. And so, trying to figure out how to not just discover the truths of ethics and get the right answers, but become the sort of person that can live those out. I think that's an equally, maybe even more important question, and one that I think is often neglected. So I would say in terms of the jargon, I'm a rights theorist. I'm a Kantian, and those help again nail down a lot of the right answers. But then the virtue theorist is which goes back to Aristotle. This is a much more ancient way of thinking about ethics. That's going to be a really important component in describing how it is we can become the types of persons that can live out those ethical truths.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but let's just put it in a layman's term, right? Like,
okay.
Hey man, I'm sort of depressed right now, but what do you think is the meaning of life? If someone asks you that.
Meaning of life is hard. I never even as a freshman. I told you I was an engineer as an undergraduate. I remember them talking about the meaning of life. My one philosophy class that I took as a freshman. I thought that's just so abstract. I don't really have time for the meaning of life. I think the better way to put it, the real question is what, rather than the meaning of life, but what is worth your life, right? What sort of goals and aims are worth you investing, your time and effort in? That's the bigger question, right? And so I think there are lots of pursuits, and this does help explain, going back to the very beginning, why I end up choosing philosophy to begin with. There are lots of pursuits that just really aren't worth a person's life. I don't think the accumulation of money, by itself. Certainly, people have ordered their lives in such a way to do that. Others have ordered their lives to gain as much power as possible, political power and other sorts of power. For other people, it's about it's just about just pleasure in life. It's about sex and food and other stuff like that. And I don't think any of those pursuits ultimately, are worth your life. I don't think those make for a good, flourishing person. And so if you wanted maybe an additional reason why I'm a Christian theist, is because I think that gives you the answer to the question that it is.
Okay, maybe you're sort of non-hedonist, but that doesn't really answer the real, like, what kind of pursuits then? What is the essence of these pursuits that make life or worthy of life, I guess.
Yeah, because fitting your life into how it is that we've been designed, right? As a theist, I think that our natures have been.
What are we designed to do then?
Way. What are we designed to do? It's life in the kingdom of God. I think that it is ultimately, again, this is a very, very Christian answer, right? But it really is pursuing life within the kingdom of God, under the reign of a king, the word king isn't used as much in the New Testament. It's usually Lord, but that's what we're talking about. Or, there's somebody in charge, and so trying to align my life, with the goals and priorities of Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah, I have found that to be a worthwhile pursuit that has helped create things within me that I think as a person, that I think are worth pursuing.
Yeah, but let's say, I'm an average Joe, and yeah, you're right, bro. I do agree that, the essence of life is to sort of live my life as if I'm obeying or being under the rule of the kingdom of God, right, on earth. But how do I practically do that? What, from your perspective?
Oh, well, first you got to get in, right? So first, if you aren't convinced, right, that is a worthwhile pursuit, then you got to go through all that stuff we talked about, earlier in the podcast. You have to come to believe that there actually is this king, that there is someone who's running the show, and he wants you, in that kingdom, a part of his kingdom, and living your life according to the principles of that kingdom, rather than the principles that we set up, for ourselves. So yeah, you gotta come to believe there is a God. You got to come to believe that you have to have the right king to follow, and then come to understand the principles that he's laying out. This is what I think in the Sermon on the Mount that in Matthew is what Jesus is primarily doing. It is laying out the principles for what a successful life looks like, as opposed to the principles that the rest of the world is using and usually crashing and burning over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I guess to end the podcast, I just want to ask this sort of out of the box question, but okay, so if I'm a Christian, right, and I wanna be this person that lives under God's kingdom on earth, right, I guess what sort of political system should I subscribe to if I want to be this person? How should I go Republican or Democrat, or what kind of political system do I want on this earth? Do I want everyone to be Christian?
I think that's a completely different issue, that the political one. So my life and my pursuits, I think that works under lots of different political systems. That works under kingdoms, empires, tyrants, right? There's nothing about the politics of the world that is fundamentally going to prevent me from pursuing life under the kingdom of God. So no, I don't have an answer to your question, because I don't think it's essential. I think it works. It's harder. I mean, I do like a democracy where there's freedom, to try to work these things out for yourself. So people in China right now and under other systems, they've got a much harder time, because they can't work these things out as freely and pursue them. So yes, I like liberal democracies for that reason. But no, I mean, I think the whole notion of a political party that's so far downstream, and and you have people who have just people who are good Christians and really trying to pursue the right things that disagree about matters of politics, and I'm okay with that.
Okay, well, I guess I'm out of questions, bro, and we actually satisfied with all your answers. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's really great to have you, man. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
Okay. So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs, or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.